Namaskar. We are delighted to inform that Symbiosis Law School Noida, in association with Lex Witness, India's first magazine on legal and corporate affairs, THS The Law Firm, and Sadgamaya presents Knowledge Series on Law and Justice. The Knowledge Series aims to provide continuing legal education to the members of the bar and to provide an opportunity to the students of law school to learn from the best and most experienced legal luminaries and have a first-hand experience of interacting with the members of the bar. Today, we have among us one of the most vibrant personality from the legal profession, Ms. Aishwarya Bhati, Additional Solicitor General of India and Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, to deliberate upon the topic media trial, boon or bane. Today's session would be moderated by Mr. Raj Kamal. So I would request Mr. Raj Kamal to set the session into motion. Over to you, Mr. Raj Kamal.
Thank you, sir. We are honored and privileged today to witness the webinar on media trial by the Additional Solicitor General of India and Senior Advocate, Mrs. Aishwarya Bhati. Ma'am, on behalf of the organizers of the Knowledge Series on Law and Justice, we welcome you and all the participants to the present webinar. Before we begin, I will set the housekeeping rules for all the participants. This session will go on for an hour and a half. During the webinar, if there are any questions, you can put your question in the Q&A box and we'll put it to ma'am while she's addressing the topic. And at the end of the webinar, there will also be a live question and answer session where you can ask the question directly to ma'am. All you need to do is press the icon, raise your hand, and we will put you in the queue and put the questions to ma'am. We will try to address as many questions as possible. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Raj Kamalji, Professor Ravandele. It's Mihirji, Akshayji, and all the students and participants of this webinar this morning. Eid Mubarak to everyone. We have Eid today, so it's indeed a great privilege for me to be coming back to the university that I visited physically, as Professor Ravandele was remembering. This is my first virtual webinar, but I have been in the premises, and I've seen such wonderful sprawling, lush premises that the faculty and the university has here in Noida. Raj Kamalji asked me to speak on this topic. When he assigned to me this, he gave me a choice of a couple of topics. And then when I read this topic, media trial, boon or bane, the first thing that actually crossed my mind was, you know, the debates and elocutions that we used to have in my childhood days. In school, we used to have these debates, you know, and they used to be like science, whether it is a boon or bane. Of course, it was quarter of a century ago, or maybe more, actually more. So that from there, you know, boon or bane continues. We started from whether science was boon or bane, and, you know, we went on to everything that was impacting our life, whether, you know, communications and internet and, you know, all of these times. We have had all kinds of debates on whether a particular thing that is impacting our lives in current sense, whether it is a boon or a bane. I have always felt, as a child also, I always used to feel that, you know, when I participated in that debate as a young student, maybe in my third, fourth, I felt that this topic itself, as, you know, science as a boon or bane, was quite intriguing. I felt it was a little misconceived. I felt it was a little misleading. But as a topic of debate, then of course I've matured over the years, and I feel that it's important to have these discussions of whether it is good or bad, how good it is, how bad it is. Ultimately, it's the line that we draw is what defines us, you know, our times, and actually converts that particular topic that we are talking about into an asset or a liability. So the bottom line is whether, you know, media and media trial may be a little bit of a, you know, because trial can only happen in a court of law. That is the whole parameter and the whole paradigm of a trial. That is how the justice delivery system contemplates and acknowledges it to be. But Media plays an extremely important role in justice delivery system. If we talk about specific constitutional provisions, then Article 19(1)(a) is the freedom of speech and expression that is deeply embedded and strongly, very fiercely and strongly protected by our courts by various judgments. Article 21, which is the all-encompassing right to life and liberty, has taken into its contours, everything that is required to live the life with the dignity of a human being. So not just an animal existence, but the dignity of a human being. The concept of fair trial also comes from Article 21. The courts have recognized it to be a very important arm and limb of Article 21, that the accused is entitled to a fair trial. Our entire criminal jurisprudence is based on an adversarial system where a crime has to be proved beyond the shadow of all reasonable doubt. And we follow the principle of innocent till proven guilty. We also believe, not just belief, the criminal jurisprudence is that let 10 accused persons go scot-free, but one innocent should not be punished. That is on one aspect. And then there are, things don't exist in vacuum or in absolute terms or in isolation terms. We have to wait. So what is on the other side of the way? The other side of the scale has the right of the victim, the right of the society to know, the sunshine theory that the US courts have propounded, scrutiny and the whole concept of fair trial, public trial, and also the times that we live in. Can we really do we really have the liberty to shun media glare into our lives? Recently we had, it was an interesting phrase that the former Solicitor General and one of the most celebrated legal doyens of our country said, Mr. Salve, in a news report, he said that Supreme Court has these days become the national dartboard of the country. Everybody's throwing darts on our national dartboard. We now see that social media has acquired new dimensions in so many ways. The Supreme Court has, of course, taken the suo motu cognizance on some contempt proceedings on some tweets that were made on the social media platforms. These were unheard of. A decade back, we did not have social media as a all-encompassing, intruding aspect of our lives. And if you see, social media, it was particularly appalling to note that somebody who's so loved and celebrated in our country as Mr. Amitabh Bachchan, during his COVID time, there was a tweet on his Twitter handle which said that, I hope you die. And for somebody to say something so sinister like that, to a person who is almost like, who has been a national hero for half a century at least in this country, these are the new realities. So how do we wait? How do we balance it out? This is not a question that has arisen just today. Of course, it has acquired different dimensions in the times that we live in, but this is a debate that has captured the imagination of the courts and have, knocked on the doors of the court for determination and consideration from the eras of 1950s and 1960s onwards. So we had, starting from Khadak Singh onwards, we have had these discussions going on, whether it was Menaka Gandhi's judgment, whether it was Mirajkar's judgment, 9 judges, Naresh Sridhar Mirajkar in 1966. 9 judges were grappling with the question of what was the sanctity of the High Court's jurisdiction to direct a in-camera trial and to prohibit excessive publication. Even at that time, the Supreme Court, 9 judges of the Supreme Court in 1966 went on to say that, yes, of course, the power is there. 19(1)(a) is a power that is that can be circumscribed by laws made under Article 19(2). But it is that circumcision has to be exercised with extreme caution. It's a great power which has to be exercised with great caution. Those were the cautionary words of 9 judges of Supreme Court in 1966. Then, through the ages, the question kept grappling one at a time, sometimes with relation to family law matters, because specifically on family law matters, there is a provision in the statute itself for in-camera proceedings. Interesting development in this matter happened in 2012, when again during the hearing of the Sahara matter, the Supreme Court was called upon to examine the validity of media reports qua some negotiations that were happening for settlement of the dispute between SEBI and Sahara. So the Supreme Court framed these questions. I mean, they decided to refer these questions to a constitution bench. And it was this constitution bench that actually considered, so the questions before the constitution bench in this case, it was Sahara India Real Estate Corporation versus SEBI, and this is 2012 10 SCC 603, bench headed by Justice Kapadia, the Chief Justice of India at that time. The very questions, the background, like I mentioned, was that the backdoor negotiations for reaching a settlement were published in headlines, and the negotiation or conciliation proceedings enjoy a slight caveat from the sunshine rule, in the sense that they can be done in closed doors and behind, because essentially these are parlays. So in conciliation proceedings, in mediation proceedings, the norms are very clear that whatever is the proceedings when they are going on, they are not to be, they're not amenable to the glare of the media or the public. And after the proceedings culminate, then, if the parties have managed to arrive at a settlement, then of course the settlement is presented before the court. But if the parties do not arrive at a settlement, then whatever has happened in proceedings to arrive at those settlements stays away from the glare of the media. No one has access to it. In fact, you can't even the parties can't contest that against each other. So in that background, the Supreme Court considered these questions. They framed these questions to examine whether any guidelines should be laid down to curtail publicity in media, to have some kind of a restriction by way of a law or a norm or a guideline that Supreme Court should lay down. So essentially, it was the question of laying down these mandatory guidelines for press media. Then the other question that they considered was with regard to the power of contempt and media, and whether the Supreme Court had jurisdiction, and whether it could be done in individual cases. They also considered the interplay between freedom of speech and expression vis-a-vis a requirement of a self-regulation if something like that should happen. Very interesting judgment this one is. The Supreme Court opened its doors. I did happen to see it as a practicing lawyer. I was not participating in it, but of course this was a very important subject, so we used to watch the hearings. And the Supreme Court opened its doors to all lawyers to assist, because they were deciding this constitutional point. And the judgment notes the submissions of the stalwart lawyers on either sides, and because everybody was concerned that it was not really about this case. It was not about the parlays having been come out in public domain. It was more about whether guidelines should be laid down in for future cases. So various aspects were considered by the court in this case, and in fact, interestingly, they even considered the international position to see how it was in in different jurisdictions across the world. Essentially, the debate started from Article 21, fair trial, open trial. What was also considered was Section 327 of the CRPC, which requires the court to be open. So the mandate of CRPC by Section 327 specifically is that the courts will be open, and it will allow, these are criminal trials we are talking about, and the court, it will allow a scrutiny by public, because the media, the public has the right to know. Of course, the section does lay down provision for a in-camera trial for sexual offenses or certain other kinds of offenses, but essentially this is the mandate of Section 327 of CRPC. The court also considered the restrictions that have been laid down in terms of Article 19.2. The whole US Indian perspective was considered because fundamental rights have been taken or inspired, not taken, but inspired by the US Constitution in large measures by our founding fathers. But interestingly, the First Amendment of the US Constitution specifically laid down freedom of media to be a fundamental right, and that is how it is recognized. And this was considered, but not embedded in that manner by our founding fathers or even the subsequent amendments. But the Supreme Court judgments have held that when Article 19.1a exists, where citizens have the right of freedom of speech and expression, then no special or exclusive right need to be laid down for the media. And the right of the media has essentially been understood to be an extension of Article 19.1c. So in theory, media enjoys the same right that a citizen enjoys under Article 19.1a. But of course, in practice, it is very, very different, because when a citizen speaks, then he speaks only to maybe one individual, a couple of individuals. But when a media house speaks, when a newspaper carries something, or a national news channel carries something, then it carries far and wide. So in this perspective, the European system was very interesting. In fact, what the court considered was how the system was in the European countries, how it was in the US, how it was in Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Of course, we always tend to close our eyes to examples which are not very good, or what we don't understand, or appreciate them as examples to emulate. But it is still, I feel that it is important to bear in mind that while it's wonderful to have this debate of free media, of a fair media, of a media which has no restrictions as the fourth limb of democracy, it's also important to understand and bear in mind how media really operates, what is the ground reality in some of the countries which are communist countries, autocratic countries, theocratic countries, Sharia law countries. The situation is very, very interesting and different there. So there's a very beautiful and very fascinating Disney character. He's called Winnie the Pooh. He's this bear who's supposed to be very cuddable and very affable, but he's slow. All he loves is honey, and he's supposed to be a little I wouldn't say dumb in his head, but the way the character is portrayed is that he likes his life and he likes the slow pace of his life. But if we were to be in China anywhere, and if we were to do what is an equivalent to a Google search there is of course no Google there. So if we were to do an equivalent of a Google search on their search engines, the message that comes is that the contents of this page are cannot be displayed in terms of the regulations, in terms of the local regulations. And it was curious for me to read that whole report on why Winnie the Pooh was banned. So you remember R.K. Lakshman, how his cartoons used to be? So there were some bold cartoonists, I must say, in China who made the cartoon of Winnie the Pooh vis-a-vis, side by side, comparing him to the premier of China, and Mr. Penn did not take a liking to it, and he did not like that he was being compared to this really affable, really likable Disney character, and therefore you cannot see Winnie the Pooh in China anywhere. Or, some other countries that maybe our twin country, how things are, the country that attained independence along with us. I mean, just one day before us, they celebrate their Independence Day. That country, in the last 74 years, not even a single head of the state who was elected in office has been removed by an election. Just imagine the profoundness of the statement. Not a single, I'm going to repeat it because I find it to be really profound. Not a single head of the state who was elected in office has been removed by an election. For us, it is such a normal thing. I mean, power changes hands after every election, you know, general elections, state elections, anti-incumbency is a big thing, and it happens so normally. We don't even put a second thought to it. But then when you see a data like that, you know, somebody who's elected in office is either killed in office, removed by a coup, armed rebellion, removed by a SIT, which is consisting of ISI officers, etc., then you realize what you have is so precious. So I think it's important to see these examples of the developed countries that we seek to emulate, but also at the same time, it is important to see the realities in the other parts of the world, where democracy, liberty, equality, justice is not so deeply ingrained as we would like it to be in the 21st century. Coming back to India, I took you on this little international perspective tour, but I found it interesting that the judgment only considered these countries and the European context and everything. Of course, the judgment then went on to chronicle the previous judgments that were there on this. Then ultimately they held that laws are already there. You know, there are, under Article 19(2), there are laws that have specifically been made with regard to protecting the reputation, you know, against defamation. There are contempt laws, which of course originate from Article 129 of the Constitution for Supreme Court, and thereafter contempt laws have been made. So, and then to protect the fair trial, the right of the accused, but the right of the victim is also something that we are seeing a new focus on. Earlier, the criminal jurisprudence was all centric towards the accused and his rights, and it is about giving him a fair trial, and you know, he was the center of that criminal trial. But in fact, before the 1980s, the victim or the complainant did not even have a right of appeal. The amendments happened when the new CRPC came, the whole regime changed, but it has been a long journey for recognizing victims' rights also as an integral aspect of fair trial and the right of the society also in that. Supreme Court considered all these aspects, you know, laid down what should be the proper way, what should be an ideal way, but went on to say that we are not going to lay down guidelines. It is for the media to to have self-regulation, to conduct itself with circumspection. But they left one window open to say that though generic and general guidelines are not called for and not necessary, but in individual cases, petitions can be filed where where there is any interference or a perceived interference with the administration of justice or the rights of the accused of a fair trial. Then in individual cases, these petitions could be filed. So this judgment of 2012 of Constitution Bench thereafter then led to multiple of these individual petitions that came to be filed in various cases. We had always seen, that there is another aspect of it is that once media is putting a focus on a matter, then there are times that it actually helps the administration of justice itself, because otherwise the whole sunshine principle, otherwise many times things tend to go under the carpet, away from the scrutiny and the transparency. So transparency is extremely important, but only transparency, not nudity. We can't have nudity in the name of transparency. We had individual petitions that were filed in the case of, Asaram Bapu's case. The petition was filed to say that there should be a gag order, and in terms of the guidelines that were laid down. But the court examined, then the court went on to examine these individual cases, went on to say that it cannot be in the facts and circumstances of this case. So that in terms of that window that was kept open in this Constitution Bench judgment, applications have been filed and applications have been examined on individual case-to-case basis. Now, that is the perspective of how courts have dealt with it. But I think we live in times right now of instant coffee, of instant noodles. There is a clamor for instant justice. There is, we are less patient as a generation, and it's not just about Indians. We are less patient as a generation inhabiting in this planet. So how do we deal with the requirement to have media to satisfy that, to have quick justice, to have media glare? Black Lives Matter. O.J. Simpson, was decades back, but Black Lives Matter has happened just a couple of months back. And but for those videos that were taken of Mr. Floyd, the world would not have rallied around it in the manner that it did. Many cases in India, Arushi Talwar's case, Priyadarshini Mattu's case, there have been many cases where things would have not moved in the manner that they would have moved, or they would have, they would have had access to justice also. So sometimes, or on most times, access to justice itself is enabled and facilitated by media. But then we had that Gurgaon school case where the guard of the Gurgaon school, where this young child was unfortunately there was a sexual abuse of this young child in the Gurgaon school. I'm forgetting the name of the school, but and this a monster was made out of this guard within this was last year. A monster was made out of this guard within the next 2-3 days. And it was only after investigation it was discovered that there is much more than what meets the eye. So perceptions, the fight of perceptions is important, but I think what is important for us to understand is equilibrium is something that we need to strive for, we need to work towards. We can't do away with media, neither the mainstream media nor the social media. That is a new menace now, that is not even subject to any regulation, that is not subject to any kind of circumspection. The examples that I mentioned right up front, we all know, we all have social media accounts, and we have seen the kind of activity that goes on those Twitter accounts or Instagram accounts, or, Sushant Singh's case is being fought in the media. We see it every day. It's happening. This is, any channel that you open, any social media that you open, and it is almost like, and you see that what is happening to media these days, even the mainstream media, some of these shows, there is a prosecutor, there is a defense lawyer, they almost make it like Janta Ki Adalat, or, that's just one show, but there are many shows. They may not be called Janta Ki Adalat, but they make almost these, courtroom kind of a situation there, where there is a prosecution, defense, charges, you have to defend yourself, and pros, cons. I don't think we can do away with it. I think it'll be wishful thinking to even think that we can do away with it. And I think they serve a very, very useful purpose for us even to try to do away with it. Now, how do we turn something that is an incredible opportunity and incredible power into an asset rather than being a liability? When I was mentioning that the times are of having less patience and instant justice and instant coffee and instant noodles, I think we also need to have a deeper circumspection on our own justice delivery system. Why we are having a heightened focus on media trial, and why, after all, the public is liking it. In democracy, the transparency is something that is required, and they want it. But the problem is that the more we allow this, the more we are allowing our systems to take a backseat. Earlier, there was almost an unwritten rule that when the matter is sub judice, then it will not be discussed in media. But those are the days of the past. It is no longer there. But look at how our systems are. If a criminal case goes on, it goes on at least for 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 decades. The closest thing, people across the countries laugh about is that definition of infinity is a civil suit in India. That is the definition of infinity. We have the dubious distinction of cases going on through generations across, across lifespans of people who are litigating. Dubious distinction again of litigations being passed on in the testamentary documents, in wills, etc. It can't be like this. If the system was working faster, if the system, wherever the vacuum exists, then it gives almost like it acts as a catalyst. It acts as a breeding ground for alternates to take place. So our justice delivery system, unfortunately, is in shambles today in terms of delivering to the citizen justice. Our systems do command a huge respect world over, in the quality of justice, in its integrity, in independence of judiciary, in the the constitutional balance that is there where between institutions. We have a perfect system, so to speak, in theory, but in practice we are bleeding. The delays are eating up our system like termites from inside. And more, if you speak to lawyers, practicing lawyers who have experience of the kind of litigation, and judges who are handling this litigation day in and day out, you will realize that people who want to poke their noses into or do frivolous kind of litigation are increasingly wanting to come in the system. Genuine litigants who have their rights, whose rights are being violated, genuine litigants want to settle out of the system. They don't want to come in the system. Alternate dispute redressal mechanism has become extremely robust. Of course, that's another matter, that alternate dispute redressal has now started to suffer with the same malaise that our traditional system suffers from. Our alternate courts that were created, consumer courts, tribunals, these were all created because the constitutional courts had too much pressure, and it was felt that tribunals could be those masters of facts in those situations. So we have now tribunals for just about every arm or every aspect of our life, starting from electricity related disputes to taxation disputes to landlord tenant disputes, matrimonial disputes, debt recovery, company, armed forces tribunal. There's specialized tribunals for everything. And then there is arbitration and conciliation. But they are being caught up in the same system. The whole purpose was to give them speedy, fast, justice delivery. But the system is turning turtle on its head. So we need to have, if the system, one more thing I must highlight, it's interesting. IPC has a provision which is where you can lodge an FIR and launch criminal prosecution for malicious prosecution. So if somebody has done a false case on you and you have suffered because of that false and malicious prosecution, then you can do a case on that person, exposing him that it was malicious prosecution. Because look at the realities that we live in. Matrimonial laws, the kind of offenses that go wrong, courts have taken cognizance that these are amongst the most misused provisions in law these days. There is one matrimonial dispute between a couple, and even if it's not really a criminal circumstances, it's just that they have grown apart, or love has gone out of their lives, there will be at least half a dozen FIRs. And those FIRs will have complexions as strong as 376 and 377 roping even father-in-laws and, brother-in-laws or sister-in-laws who are long married and staying, separately. At the same time, we continue to be a country where daughter-in-laws alone lose their lives in kitchen accidents. It's never the mother-in-law, it's never the sister-in-law. So how does this work? I mean, and like I was mentioning, so malicious prosecution, despite so much of hue and cry and so much of anger against false prosecutions being there, I must tell you, in my 22 years of standing at the bar, I have not come across a single case of malicious prosecution. Many of my own clients who felt that they had been roped in wrongly, and because of a malice by the other person who had lodged this FIR, launched this prosecution on them. Finally, when they were able to, get out of the system, malicious prosecution is something that you can launch only after you have gone through that, that struggle and gotten out of it unscathed. They were so tired of the system that they did not even want to go back. So 22 years of my standing at the bar, and I've not seen a single case of malicious prosecution. That says a lot. That's not how it happens in the developed countries. The justice delivery system moves faster. There is a price that one has to pay if malicious prosecutions are launched, false cases are made. Here it's just easy. The delay is actually becoming counterproductive. So I feel that we need to focus on having our systems, making them more robust. In theory it's all fine, but in practice we have to bring the citizen back to the center stage of justice delivery system. We have these amazing systems, but if we can't deliver justice to the citizen for whom this whole system has been built, then we are going to have these alternative mechanisms. We are going to have increasingly trials by media, and the need for us to debate these issues, understand the pros and cons of these issues. There are really no rights and wrongs. Rights and wrongs will depend on each, like Supreme Court said in that Constitution bench judgment, it will depend on the facts and circumstances of each case. But time has come for us to understand the mischief which exists. Mischief rule is a rule that, the legislators, the lawmakers often employ to when they are thinking of a solution to a problem. Then it always, the starting point is, what is the mischief that is sought to be curbed? So what is the mischief that is sought to be curbed by when we are debating on media trial? The mischief is that we want our justice delivery systems, which are robust systems, which are dynamic systems, which allow a balance, an equilibrium between the need of a fair trial, a public trial, and the right of the victim, the society, public at large, to have justice in equal measures. Because that balance is going wrong. That is why we are having these, these inroads being made into justice delivery system by various mechanisms. And if we focus on the mischief, which is the root cause of it, I feel that, that would be a huge solution, and that would actually allow us to have media back, as an asset and not the liability that it becomes in some of the cases. So these are some of my thoughts, and we can now throw the floor open and see if there is any interaction. Till the questions are compiled, maybe Professor Saab can share some of his views. Rajkamalji, Mihirji, let's hear.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for an enlightening lecture, ma'am. And a few of the questions are there by the participants. I'll quote them to you. So Mr. Sudhakar Saraswatullah asks this question, that media trial may be biased or can be bought in. Certain times it may even influence judicial minds. Please, what are your views, ma'am, on this?
So I think fundamentally, again, we need to understand that any system, any chair is only as good as the person who's manning that chair or manning that system. Of course, media doesn't fall from the sky, neither does judiciary. So they can be biased. Judges are supposed to be above biases, but then that's not how it happens in practice. There are individual personal likes, dislikes. If you don't want to use such strong words as biases and prejudices, there are individual perceptions that none of us can shirk out of. And no matter what we might believe them to be, they hold these constitutional provisions and media is this fourth pillar, but ultimately they are amenable to the biases that you and I are amenable to, or susceptible to, or vulnerable to. That is why we have the system of checks and balances. See, I think the solution will lie once our systems are more robust and we are able to have justice delivery in a time bound manner where the truth actually comes out. So Satyamaev Jayate actually becomes the order of the day, and quickly so. But till that time, we will have to deal with these individual biases. And yes, these biases do exist. It will be utopian for any of us to think that the judges are above all of this, or the media is above all of this. That's not what we have seen in practice. But still, I would still also highlight on a hope that we have a system of checks and balances. So whoever is transgressing their boundary, it takes time. Of course, our system takes time, but ultimately, if the boundary is being transgressed, then the system of check and balances is very. That is one system I feel is very, very robust still in our constitutional mechanism.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, he has a follow-up question that would you consider that media to be the fourth pillar along with the parliament, executive and judiciary?
There can be no denying that. There can be no denying that, because this is a democracy. It's a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We have to have we have to have an electorate that chooses the government that it wants. I mean, we will only get what we deserve. As a nation, we will get what we deserve. So media plays that important role. In fact, not just as a fourth pillar, but even as a check and balance of the rest of the three pillars. I think media plays a very, very important role, and that role has to be there. And here you make that comparison with those countries that I was mentioning, where you can't even see Winnie the Pooh. When you see those countries and the kind of media reports that come up from those countries, and the kind of, just I think 3-4 months back, there was this, I think she was a TikTok star, this girl from China, where she was talking about eye makeup, and she was giving a module on eye makeup. It made huge news because in the middle of that eye makeup module, she raised the concerns of the atrocities that were happening in this province of China with the Muslims of that province. And she wanted to just, it raised alarms, and quickly it was banned. TikTok, of course, is a Chinese company, Chinese app, but they banned her. So, I mean, imagine they have to go to that level of desperation to make their voices heard. That doesn't happen in our country. I mean, our system can definitely be improved, but media as a fourth pillar, as a pillar that gives us access to the functioning of the rest of the three pillars, is something that we absolutely need. We can't do away with it.
Thank you, ma'am. Mihir, you have one query.
Yes, ma'am. Before we go to the live questions, ma'am, Mr. Alok Kumar from THS, who's supporting us in this endeavor, wants to ask a question, and I'll read it. He says, does media trial prejudices the defense case and is antithesis to fair trial? He further goes on to say, are judges capable of being insulated from media trial? The legal issues of balance between freedom of speech and expression versus right to fair trial, presumption of innocence under the Evidence Act, burden of proof, etc. So what are your views on this, ma'am?
Of course, yes. Media reports can bias, can influence, can prejudice the prosecution case as also the defense case. And yes, I mean, for one part of the question on judges, whether they may get influenced or biased with it, I've already answered. Like they don't fall out of the sky. They are amenable, vulnerable, and susceptible to the same biases that we as individuals have. Of course, their constitutional position allows them a much greater, a leeway. They have to have much stronger integrity, much stronger character, courage, everything. That is why they are judges. That is why they are there. But it would be. I mean, we of course we can be ostriches and dig our heads into the sand and believe that the problem doesn't exist. But I don't think ostrich syndrome is a very useful syndrome to have. I think we have to understand the reality, face it, and go with it. That is why you see that in the Constitution bench, the window has been kept open. The Supreme Court did not lay down any guidelines, but they said it will depend on what kind of reporting is happening in a case. Whether Supreme Court has gone on to say in many cases they did, of course you don't find many cases where gags are done by Supreme Court, but trial courts and high courts have on many occasions passed these gag orders for particular duration or particular period of time or on particular aspects. You don't see many reported judgments on that because many of these issues don't, they result in a dismissal or at the SLP stage, but such orders are passed to ensure that the rule of law is preserved, that the right of the prosecution and defense is balanced in a manner. But sometimes there are occasions that media launches its own investigation. We have seen that also happening. And, there are sting operations, but many of these sting operations, mind you, again, have been accepted by Supreme Court, and they felt that those sting operations must be published. So there were questions which were raised with regard to, Tehelka sting operation, or, of course, the Neera Radia tapes, etc., are being heard. So it's a mixed bag. You have to, it's the facts and circumstances of each case, how it is going to impact the prosecution or the defense, and in what manner it must be circumscribed. A huge leeway is available. A huge latitude is available. The curtailment is very, very narrow, and it is kept at on a tight leash, and rightly so.
So, ma'am, the follow-up that he wants to pose is that, in your view, to sum up what you said, he wants to know whether media trial encourages retributive justice, in a way.
Yeah, well, our punishment theories are 5. Retribution is just one of them. Yeah, but then maybe it's not media trial. Maybe it's us as a generation that we are too impatient to wait for the process to take its turn. Why just individual media trials? I mean, we as citizens, I'm not talking about you or me individually, but a huge majority of our country has actually rejoiced on the recent encounters that have taken place of hardened criminals. There is a increased focus again on extrajudicial the Supreme Court had to lay down that judgment on mob lynching and extrajudicial measures being taken by just media. Public is doing it. So it's the time that we live in, I feel. I don't think we should be blaming the media on it. Media also has very interesting stories on reformative punishment. There is a very interesting program that I saw. Of course, I come from Rajasthan, so the focus on Rajasthan news is special for me. But the open jails of Rajasthan, in the reformative theory of punishment, have almost become exemplary. Where in the later stages of punishment, these criminals, on the basis of their conduct and their behavior and all the criteria that the prison boards do consider, they are kept in these open jails where their families are allowed to come stay with them. They are allowed all the conjugal rights. They can even go out to work, but only restriction on them is they come back and they have to sleep there. They have to spend the night there. Otherwise, they are getting ready for their integration back into the society. So it's not like media only has these stories where it's just retribution and retribution. Of course, we as a society, I mean, retribution has it appeals to us more. Media only shows what appeals to us more, what sells more. It's TRP that runs them. It's the TRP that governs what is being shown to us. It, of course, becomes a vicious cycle, but I don't think we can just happily say that media is responsible for all of this and we have no role to play in this.
Thank you.
We get what we deserve.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, we have few live questions. I'll invite Charvi Kumar to please ask question to ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am. It has been such an honor to hear you. And I absolutely agree that, yes, we can't absolutely demonize the media. But building upon what you said, that it should be, I mean, it is the fourth pillar of the democracy. Should we then not expect a higher standard of conduct from them, just as we would from our parliament or just as we would from our judges? So my whole thing is that it's really good when they bring to light, say, the failures of the state to protect its own people. So whether that's in the case of George Floyd or Jessica Lal, but should it use its power to attack people or spread misinformation? There was no ramification against the media for spreading lies about the minor, the child in conflict with law in the Nirbhaya case. They spread outright lies, which was later, chastised by the board that finally tried him, but the damage was done. Everyone viewed him as this demon, this monster who had done all these things that he hadn't done. And on the basis of that, the country was able to pass a bill that completely violated norms of international child rights law. And then there's Arushi Talwar's case, where they, without any proper evidence, just outed to everyone that she was in a sexual relationship with the domestic help, essentially outing her as a rape victim. So it feels very strange to me that they can say these things and get away with it. Criticizing the government is one thing. Attacking people without any information and spreading actual lies is quite another. Ma'am, what do you have to say about that?
I don't think anybody can disagree with you, Charvi. I mean, that is the reality. That is how it is. And, it doesn't matter if there is ultimately an acquittal after going through the process of the justice delivery mechanism. The reputation and, the entire employment, life, family, everything is gone. It just goes then and there. So nobody can really disagree with your proposition that, there should be a much greater deal of circumspection by the media. There are individual cases of defamation, which are, so that right is available to citizens. That right is available even against media houses. It's not like those rights are not available. And we have seen that, cases are being filed against media houses for irresponsible journalism. Nobody can act an immunity in acting irresponsibly. And that applies more so for media, because the impact of media is far greater. So you and I also cannot, claim to have some immunity where we want to act irresponsibly in any manner. There is a rule of law that binds all of us equally, and it binds media also. So, but at the same time, we have seen that this, why I started with judgments before I gave my points and my perspective to this theory, was to tell you that this has engaged the highest court of our country on multiple occasions across decades of our existence as a free, republic, democratic, constitutional country. And at every stage they have, and by constitution benches, the scrutiny has and consideration has been by constitution benches, and they have stopped short of laying down any guidelines for media to operate in. but keeping that window open for individual cases, and in individual cases, those restraint orders to be passed. So far as individuals are concerned, there's no power of contempt, but then the right of defamation, etc., is all available. So I think we need to hold the irresponsibility accountable much more. I think in India we have gotten used to taking, having this jugaad, which is an asset of us as Indians, has allowed us to become very patient with a lot of things that we should be absolutely impatient about. Whatever things we should have zero tolerance about, we tend to just take them in our stride. So I think we need to draw the line and take what we need to take, but absolutely have zero tolerance for what we need not take and we should not take.
Thank you, ma'am. Garima Yadav, could you please unmute yourself and ask the next question?
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you so much for giving this lecture, because you just didn't only talked about the laws. You also gave us so many examples which helped a sociologist like me to understand the whole talk in a better manner. Now, my question is, ma'am, that that popular saying that justice delayed is justice denied. So my personal understanding is that these media trials are being accepted by the masses, especially in India, maybe because of the notion of justice being denied. So they just want instant gratification or instant justice, which is something not being provided by the Indian judicial system. Along with this, I want to add one more point that so in the world of post-truth that we are living in, can the judicial system adapt itself to not only deliver justice, but also give the appearance of giving out justice? So because in post-truth world, we are focusing more on emotions rather than facts, rather than scientific evidences. And media is fanning that emotional part. So how do you think the judicial system or the traditional authorities can actually adapt in this post-truth world, along with the media trial, which is something that is used by every household as an entertainment source also? Thank you, ma'am.
Interesting observations there, Garima. Post-truth was an expression that you used. Another expression that is being used is that these are the times of shoot and scoot. You just shoot and you scoot out of there, and then that's it. You are not answerable. There's no responsibility there. Yes, we are seeing what we want to see, and more and more households, we are constantly glued into these stories. We want to hear the stories, and often after the 20-year trial or the 10-year appellate period, after the whole process is over, there are very few cases where those judgments actually make headlines. It's very interesting to note that a crime or an offense that has happened, the kind of media glare that it receives in the initial few days or during investigation, when it should actually, there should be less glare on it. And after the judgment, when there is finality of law, there should be a better scrutiny on it. It does not really happen. I have shared the perspectives that I had, and when you said that I gave the social perspectives in addition to law, actually this is something that I have learned recently. The lockdown period was a time that I used to read some books about life cycles and lifestyles and of these legal doyens. I read about Mr. Palkhiwala a lot, because I had never seen him in court. I never had that opportunity, but his journey was something that has inspired generations of students of law, all of us in many ways. So I read a lot there, and I found that the way Mr. Palkhiwala spoke about legal issues, he always connected them to the the times, the social, the political aspect of the society that we exist in, because law is not something, law keeps pace with life. Law will not exist in vacuum. Even our constitution has a dynamic interpretation. They are letters of law. They are, the basic structure doctrine is all very fine, but what is important is that on multiple occasions, the Supreme Court has also said that we, fundamental rights are like empty vessels. Every generation fills in those empty vessels with the wisdom of its own time. So it is up to fill it up with our own wisdom to understand the challenges that we face today. There are all these dangers with media trial, but still, on the preponderance of probabilities, if we were to have a shutdown of media from reporting these offenses or reporting crimes, which is life, they are reporting life. So if we were to shut it down or curtail it, or yes, regulation must be there, but that curtailment will lead to a much bigger problem than what is being done now. That's what I feel.
Thank you, ma'am. We have Mr. Rajneesh Jindal who will ask the next query.
Yeah, good morning, ma'am. Thank you very much for this. I just want to say this informative session. And my question is basically, it is a question as well as it is basically an experience as well. See, no doubt that media trial has its own issues. But in few of the cases, as we know that media has played a very crucial role in molding the mindset of the present generation and does an incredible job in bringing the criminal on the hook. So my point is basically, for example, right now, what is happening with respect to the because of the corona pandemic. So in few of the cases, like I was just witnessing one situation where the parents were talking about the schools that they are not basically replying them, or they're not paying any heed to them. So don't we think that media is basically having a role in basically making the policy makers aware that what exactly is going on? And the one thing basically which we ignore on daily basis, that we only talk about the pillars, we talk about the 4 pillars, but we forgot about the foundation upon which these pillars are based upon, we the people of India. So why don't we as a people of this country, why don't we basically take this responsibility that these kind of whatever is happening in this media domain is not just this when I was reading the positive sides of the media on the Google, I wasn't been able to get even a single positive aspect of the media. But the point is, don't we think that we should have a responsibility first as a people of this country? Second, no doubt that media is obviously they are having this positive as well as the pros and cons as actually. And the ultimate point which I would like to ask from you is, what should be done in this regard? What should be the better solution to resolve this query? Because every time we talk about the problems, but we generally ignore the solutions. So solutions basically lie with the people of India, or where exactly is the solution, ma'am? That is my question. Thank you, ma'am.
So Rajneesh ji, you will, though on Google you may not have found anything, but you will find many Supreme Court judgments on many important issues being initiated by media reports. So where they have taken suo motu cognizance of media reports on various issues. The entire era of public interest litigation, when it was the media reports used to be very strong foundational basis for many of these public interest issues that were laid down. I completely agree with you on this point that the citizen has to be at the fulcrum of the change that we want. Ultimately, media, like we all know, media operates very strictly on the TRP. I mean, not social media, but the mainstream media works on TRP. And TRP is how we are watching it, what we are liking, which channel are we watching. So ultimately, it all comes down to us being the fulcrum of the change that we want in the system. Media does play a very important role. There can be no denying that. Even as individuals, there can be no denying that, because, you know, probably not in the case of every case, but where there are issues with regard to high and mighty, where there are influential people who are supposed to be on the other side of law, media plays a very important role in exposing that and bringing it out in the public glare. And then it is more difficult for it to be, shuffled under the carpet in any manner. After all, democracy has that power. So yes, citizens will have to be at the center of it all. We have to realize that I think we as citizens have become extremely right oriented. We have to have our orientation towards responsibilities also. There was a very interesting quotation from Palkiwala's book that I'll just take out while you ask the next question on the balance between rights and responsibilities. I'll quote it because he said it. He says it in really beautiful words. But ultimately, it's all up to us.
Thank you, ma'am. And we have the next query from Mr. Avinash Singh Vaisen. Can you please ask your question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I have two questions. One is with regards to the role of media on public perception and the second on the judicial perception. So I'll first ask the first one, and after you answer, I'll ask the second one. Ma'am, the first one is the role of media on public perception. Do you think that they should be more sensitized towards our constitutional values? Because when you see media is normalizing and rewarding police brutality, case in point, the encounters that recently took place, whereas cases of police brutality wherein a citizen has suffered has not been given any heed, case in point, the Jairaj and Phoenix case, right? So do you think that they need to be sensitized more towards our constitutional values, because ultimately they are forming public opinion, right? And when they form public opinion that police brutality is normal, whereas as expected, like extrajudicial killings are normal and your rights do not have any value, that is the entire public perception that comes out from these reportings. So do you think that they should have a more constitutional approach towards their reporting?
You know, there cannot be two answers to your question, of course, but it has to be, you know, we do have the Press Trust of India and some amount of regulation as a regulatory mechanism, but it has to be self-regulation more. And if they are going to fail at self-regulation, then, you know, like this entire fourth pillar and the entire activism of media trial has flourished because of the space that the traditional justice delivery system provided by being infested with delays. Now, if media trials, which serve a very important purpose, if that, not media trial, I wouldn't use that word, but scrutiny of media or, stories in media about matters which are going on, or, offenses or crimes. If I also, that there is, the law of nature is quite uncanny. It has a way of catching up. For decades, all of us were cribbing about having no time at all, our lives being so busy. And boom, we have COVID-19 and we have so much of time at our hands that most of us for the initial months did not know what to do with our times. We were finding new and ingenious ways. So nature has a uncanny way of catching up with things that go out of equilibrium. If media is not going to self-regulate, have circumspection, operate in the constitutional contours, nobody can be extra constitutional and claim to have any immunity about it. No, that doesn't exist. India is a country that rule of law is deeply embedded and strongly recognized as a basic structure of our constitution. It is one of the paradigms and the basic parameters on which we exist as a country. So that is not going away anywhere. But if media is not, fails in keeping the balance, then there will be a mechanism by which the equilibrium will be restored. Let's see who manages to restore that equilibrium. But the system of check and balances will ensure that that equilibrium is restored. I must now quote that I found that Palkiwala's quotation. So Palkiwala says that it is true that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, but it is true in even a deeper sense that eternal responsibility is also part of price of liberty. He goes on to say, excessive authority without liberty is intolerable, but excessive liberty without authority and without responsibility soon become equally intolerable. And then he ends by saying, liberty has a hypnotizing sound, while unfortunately, responsibility has no sex appeal. So let's, I mean, and I mean, nobody could have said it any better. Look at the words in which he says it, and he says it in the 90s. This is out of a lecture that he was giving in university in Canada, in Calgary. But very, very scathing, very prophetic, and very profound, balanced lines for us to remind us of our legal rights and legal responsibilities, both for us as citizens, for the press as the fourth pillar.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for quoting the same to us.
Thank you, ma'am. Now moving on to my second question. This is with regards to the role of media on the judiciary. So essentially, I'll ask this in special reference with the rarest of the rare doctrine. So when you see cases that are in public highlight because of the media coverage, they are essentially what constitute the rarest of the rare. In most of the cases, those are the reflections of what the media is, of what the media has covered. So I'll draw two examples. One is obviously the Nirbhaya case, wherein the death penalty was given to the accused, with the exception of one person who was a minor. And the second, I'd like to draw a parallel with the recent Jamshedpur, wherein the Jamshedpur case, wherein a minor was raped and murdered by beheading, and because it was not covered by the media, and the facts and circumstances of the case did warrant a death penalty, it was only given a life imprisonment. The perpetrator, one main perpetrator, was given the life imprisonment, whereas the other two were given 10 years in imprisonment each. So do you think that because of the selective coverage in certain aspects, judiciary also turns a blind eye towards some matters if it is not covered appropriately by media?
I wouldn't go to that extreme and say that judiciary turns a blind eye towards some cases just because they have not, they have not reached or grabbed the attention of mainstream media or any media. I wouldn't go to that extreme, but certainly media glare and media importance. You know, in one of the arguments for sentencing, you as students of law would be aware that when a trial takes place, you know, after the conviction, there is a separate hearing for the purpose of sentence. So once the trial has concluded in a conviction, if it is an acquittal, of course it's an acquittal, but if it is a conviction, then usually at least 1 day's time is given for arguments to be advanced, and it's not in the same hearing as the pronouncement of judgment of conviction. One more hearing is at least given for the accused side and the prosecution side, both to, you know, assess their arguments on sentence and the quantum of sentence. And in that hearing, one of the arguments and one of the more important considerations is the is whether that crime has shocked the conscience of the society. Now, shocking the conscience of the society is an important parameter for determining the quantum of the sentence. That argument is made both by the prosecution side and the defense side both. So prosecution claims that this has had an impact on the society, and the defense claims that, well, this was just a, you know, individual isolated crime between two individuals and it hasn't had any impact on the society. So, you understand, I mean, we as students of law understand that crime is tried not by the victim. The criminal cases are never read as A versus the accused, the victim versus the accused. They're never tried like that. It is always state versus the accused. Why? Because it is understood to be a crime against not just the victim. Victim is just the victim of the crime, but it is a wrong against the society. That is why that is one of the most determining factors between differentiating between a civil wrong and a criminal wrong. So media's role, when the impact, where it shows that the impact has been more on the society, or it has shocked the conscience of the society, and therefore it calls for a higher punishment, is a settled, accepted norm in the quantum of sentence considerations. But whatever does not receive media glare doesn't mean that it does not follow the rule of law. The courts in India are duty bound and they do follow the rule of law. just because a case has got media glare, it may show that the impact is more on the society. But that doesn't mean that a crime that has not received media attention has been any less heinous. So the conviction will be there, only the quantum of sentence may differ.
Thank you, ma'am. We have the next question from Dr. Mohit Sharma.
Yeah, a very good afternoon to you, ma'am. So first of all, it's too good to listen to you on a different topic, means, and in such a easy way, and you have covered a plenty of things, not only the legal provision but the social provision as well. Though my question is already sold, that plenty of the questions were asked before my question, and you have given the answer in such a way that I do not need to ask the question. But I know only one thing, that listening you again is too good. Means I have already listened, means I have already discussed with you the earlier provision, right to information, on a All India Law Forums. And right now it is a totally different topic, but whatever topic is given to you, ma'am, you in such a way you discuss that topic that we really enjoy a lot. So again, it's very thank. But even then, my question is a little bit question, that it is the Lord Macaulay who used the word, means the fourth pillar of democracy, and it has since been quoted often, and free media is considerable indispensable in democracy. But today's current present scenario, the media is not what it was then. So I just want to listen your views, that what should be done towards the media as well as towards the common people, that in reality we took this media as the fourth pillar of the democracy.
First of all, thank you so very much for such kind words of almost I'm like flattered almost. It's very kind of you to say that. I try to try to understand the topic that is assigned to me. I feel that the biggest learning of a topic happens when you share your thoughts on that topic with your colleagues and your fellow students of law, whether they are practicing law, whether they are teaching law, whether they are studying law. We are all students of law in different areas. And there's one thing, some of these amazing tall lawyers and leaders of our bar, they say some things which stay with us. So when I prepare cases and when I prepare legal issues which are given to me, there's one thing that Mr. Fali Nariman had once said in one of his interviews, that whenever you are preparing a file or a legal issue, then of course you have to research, you have to read, you have to acquaint yourself with multiple ideas and thoughts of people which are there in public domain. Now it is easy to do research with the internet, and also with our legal softwares, all the judgments and where it is quoted, and it's almost statistical. We get very nice data which shows us how it has been followed, where it has been followed, and etc. So it's easy to do research, but still most important thing that I gained from Mr. Fali Nariman's interview on that topic when he was giving advice was for young lawyers. I mean, you keep that advice and it stays with you. I'm still a young lawyer, but was that allow the legal preposition and your research to circulate in your mind. Sit over it. I mean, let it churn in your stomach. Allow it to synthesize with your thoughts. Don't just quote the research that you have done. Gather it, absorb it, and try to synthesize it, try to circulate it, analyze it, and sleep over it. And then share your thoughts. That will have, that usually has, an element of your own identity and your own, philosophy along with the research that you have done. So that has helped me a lot, and I shared that with you because you said you liked my style of presenting legal issues. So if you could also do that, and I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Like it has worked for me, it'll work for everyone. It's a winning formula. Now, coming to the solutions that you're right. I mean, media is not what it was when Macaulay said this thing about media. You're right, absolutely right. There can be no denying that. But the world also hasn't been the same. We as citizens are not same. We as nations are not same. We as the world are not same. We can either, I wouldn't say crib, but I would, for the lack of a better word, I would say we could either, get agitated or upset about the fact that, we have gone down from perfection. Things have headed south in many ways. You talk to old timers, they will always say, oh, in our times it used to be like that, in our times it used to be like that. Yes, those times are not there, these are different times, but it is no, I'm not one to subscribe to the view that our time is worse off than the time that was there earlier. In so many ways our times are more exciting. I mean, look at the world saw a Spanish flu 100 years back. It was supposed to be an equal magnitude pandemic as we are having today. But still, the literature that we have seen or read about the Spanish flu is the impact was not so much because world was not such a small place. So world becoming a smaller place, now SpaceX talking about taking us and colonizing Mars. We don't know where life is going to take us. Moon is the thing of the past. Now we are talking about life and colonies on Mars. We don't know if Elon Musk will succeed in taking us to Mars and actually having colonies and nations and universities and colleges. But if life goes, law will follow. I think I'm becoming a little philosophical here, but I think the bottom line and the center of it all is the individual. None of these social, legal, constitutional changes can happen without the focus of the individual. Systems have to be there. Systems are robust. In India, we don't have a problem of systems. Our systems are very, very well built. The problem really happens in our laws also is one of implementation. And somewhere losing the focus in implementation processes becomes counterproductive and starts impacting the system itself. So let's understand and realize the challenges. And I mean, we are taking all brickbats against media, probably today, but look at how unregulated social media is. You can get away with just about anything in social media. Supreme Court had to take cognizance of issuing guidelines to the social media houses, to the intermediaries. They were just calling themselves intermediaries and getting away with it for content with regard to child pornography. This is not, there's no debate that this is completely illegal, but still dark web is something that exists. It is a reality that exists, and social media is completely unregulated. It is the anonymity gives, there is still some accountability. Media houses are responsible. They have to work within the framework and be responsible about their actions. But the seeming anonymity that that gives people the liberty and the latitude to do whatever they want on social media platforms, that is a bigger challenge that is staring us. So we, for that reason, need to have our media houses to be even more robust and strong fourth pillars, so that the unregulated, when social media started, when internet started as a medium of news, it was said that, well, it is unregulated, so anyone can just say anything, and that actually like blockchain has become a regulation in itself. Blockchain today, cryptocurrency was the first one, I think, to use that blockchain concept. But because blockchain is open to all, amenable to all, uses every computer that it uses as a system, therefore it cannot be changed. So do we go in that direction where everything is there, everything is open? Or do we have some kind of regulation? I don't know how the way of the future is going to be. These are still some questions which need to be asked, but I think we will still get what we deserve, and what we really want to get, we will get to that. Mankind, as Homo sapiens, we are extremely resilient and resolute. That becomes our pitfall also at many times, but then we do manage to get what we really set our eyes to get.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
We have the next participants, Aishani Shukla, who will ask the question.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, professors. My question to you, ma'am, is in your opinion, in a country like ours, where there is a varied educational understanding and transitional class realities, and there are media houses running on each level or class of society, doesn't it become more important to lay down certain minimum guidelines for press houses rather than refraining from doing so in the name of freedom of expression and liberty?
Thank you, Aishani, for your question. I believe I mean, it's already covered in what I have said earlier, but I'll just cap it for, I mean, I'll just maybe succinctly put it again for you. I feel that increasingly the need for regulation is being felt. The Supreme Court has restrained itself from doing it so far. In individual cases, it is still happening. But if things go any more south than where they are, then I think the system will have to be brought in to have some kind of regulation. But I think for now, I think it is best in the manner that it is, rather than having laying down a broad guideline, because it will have to go on facts and circumstances of each case, even though it may be a more laborious, more cumbersome, more a longer process to go through. But laying down broad guidelines may prove to be counterproductive for a democratic country like ours, where we take pride in celebrating the equality, the liberty, the principles, the rule of law. That's what I feel still.
Thank you, ma'am. We have the last live question from Rachna Joshi. Please ask your question.
There has been an exhilarating experience listening to you. For two reasons primarily. One,
can you be a little louder, please?
One, it's been an exhilarating experience listening to Aishwarya, and primarily for two reasons. One, she followed the principle that nothing is worth doing unless it's worth doing very well. Two, your answers have reflected an unbiased and open mind. That makes me proud of you. There is a small query that has been mine, and you being holding a very responsible position today. The fluid state that the subject matter has today, subject matter of discussion. Do you have something in mind in the manner in which you would like to contribute and use your officers to bring a better clarity or a little more explicit position in the area which we are discussing today? Do you have something in mind which, in the manner in which you like to contribute to the subject matter?
So I think I managed to get most of what Rachna ma'am was saying. I tried, you were a little, the volume was a little low, ma'am. You have, of course, always been very, very kind to me. Rachna ma'am has seen me grow from a young lawyer. I do have the privilege of having her as a neighbor next to my office. So she has seen me in that journey from the beginning, and she has been extremely kind to me, very encouraging. She has on multiple occasions told me, given me inputs which have made my professional journey better. And that's the wonderful thing about this profession. Though it's considered a very ruthless profession, a very difficult profession, especially for young lawyers, and if you're a woman at that, you had it. And a woman and a young mother, as a young lawyer, then it becomes a huge hassle for you, but then you get amazing colleagues and seniors in your journey who become your guides, who become your teachers. So Rachna ma'am has been one of those amazing people in my life, and So I think ma'am was saying that the topic became very fluid, and maybe if I could give some concrete suggestions on, I think that's what ma'am was saying. Ma'am, you're right. It became, I also felt that in the question answers, it actually became too philosophical also. It did not really remain a legal debate. But then I was just trying to share my thoughts in the best possible manner to the questions that were coming. So if I were to crystallize on the way forward for suggestions and solutions for way forward, I would say that I don't think time has come for us to take any different position as students of law. I mean, as students of law, we do have the right to academically analyze and even criticize judgments of constitution benches. So I don't think the time has come for us to differ from the Sahara judgment of authored by Justice Kapadia. And I believe that the individual parameters window that has been kept open by the constitution bench is the right window to have. Also, there are sufficient laws to safeguard the reputation of individuals. We just don't exercise those rights enough. I think we need to, if we feel strongly about it, we need to exercise those rights. We need to be cautious about what we are reading and watching in media, because it is our TRP and ultimately which is governing what we see. I don't think I have anything else to add, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Rachna ma'am, for the question. Ma'am, before concluding the webinar, we have just last two questions. I'll put it across to you, ma'am. One is from an anonymous participant. So he quotes that one of your statement about there being a difference between a general revelation of actual events behind an incident and there being nudity. So quoting this, he asks a question: shall the revealing of a political nexus behind suppressing a particular individual by way of rape, fake encounters, etc., be considered trying to make the system naked? This is the question, ma'am.
No, my statement was more that we need to have a transparent system, but in the name of transparency, we can't have nudity. That was my respectful submission. But the proposition that you are asking me to comment on, there can't be two answers to this. I mean, it is illegal, and if the conspiracy behind that illegality has to be unearthed, it has to be unearthed. How can it be nudity? It is what the justice delivery system mandates to be done.
Thank you, ma'am. So, ma'am, there's the last question for the day from Dr. Madhukar Sharma. He quotes, I'll quote, when we question the media trial on the point that it can influence the judges, we take a premise that judges can get influence, which contradicts the very idea behind the statute of Lady Justice. Isn't it questioning the very integrity of the justice, of the judges?
So that the Lady Justice is also interesting in the English sense. The Lady Justice is blindfolded, but and also in the Greek sense, from where she starts. But the Indian Lady of Justice does not have a blindfold. She has her eyes open, and initially, I mean, I saw this not too long back. I did not realize this in the corridor of the judges where we don't have access. There, the Lady Justice is without the blindfold, and it was when we inquired, we were told that the whole purpose of that is that so that she sees, she is open, with her open eyes, she can actually understand better. She can see the biases, she can see the follies, and she can take a much more considered view. She need not just weigh in the scale. She should use her eyes also. So I think it's important for our judges also to have access to what is there in media. Yes, wherever media is going overboard, it needs to be checked, and it's the very same judges that we rely on for checking media going overboard also. But at the same time, where excesses are happening, then also the highlight. That is why Supreme Court has taken on many occasions, or High Courts take cognizance of media reports. and they are in re cases. They are suo motu cognizance on a media report that is taken on particular issues. So this is a line that will have to be continued to be treaded with balance, with equilibrium, and whenever it is lost, we thankfully have our justice delivery system to bring the balance right back.
Thank you, ma'am. In a follow-up question, I will quote, Dr. Madhukar Sharma asks, when we read the conflict between freedom of speech and expression and right to fair trial, is it a legal conflict altogether, or is it a conflict of professional ethical conduct of the media world?
I would say it would be a legal conflict, professional conflict. Yes, in the sense that they have professional ethics and they obviously are bound by those professional ethics like all professionals. But the conflict between 19(1)(a) and, many of us often tend to gloss over the rest of the sub-articles of 19. We just confine ourselves to Article 19(1). We read quickly from A to G and that's it. We don't want to read the rest of the sub-articles. But it's not really a conflict, because duties are not just what are there in Part 4A of our Constitution, vis-a-vis the fundamental rights in Part 3 of the Constitution. To quote the current Chief Justice, he said that if I have the right to move my arm, my right to move my arm ends where my colleague's nose starts. I can't be moving my arms in an indiscriminate manner so as to be hitting my colleague, the person sitting next to me, his nose. No. So if I have the freedom of speech today here, you have called me, you all have a responsibility and duty to hear me. We've been here for an hour and a half. Anyone of you could have easily said, well, too much philosophy for the day. Let's just get it over with. But rights and duties exist more in the jurisprudential terms that we have read in, jurisprudence classrooms. That every right has a corresponding duty that everyone around us has to have. That's why I read from Palkiwala those scathing and those really prophetic words to understand that it's the balance between the right and responsibility, legal right and legal responsibility, that defines ultimately in the manner in which that legal right itself can be enjoyed. So legal conflict, yes. Professional conflict, yes. But I wouldn't really call it a conflict. It is balancing out, because it cannot exist in absolute terms. We all have to understand that nothing exists in absolute terms in this world.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the erudite and vibrant and philosophical lecture. And now I will invite Dr. Professor C.J. Ravandle, sir, our guru and mentor, to give a concluding remark, after which my colleague, Mr. Kumar Mihir, will extend the vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Ma'am, thank you very much for the session. I will not call it as a lecture because it was extempore and you were connecting several dots. I have few submissions to make as a learner of law, and I take pride in saying that my guru in my life always has been my father, and his guru has been my grandmother. So I have learned from their wisdom. My father always has informed me that today most of us are interested in knowing what lies beneath, but nobody is bothered to see what lies before us. And in this we have lost what he always says in Marathi, Prakashachi Yatra, means journey towards light. So he says that, and that's what he was informed by his guru, that when it comes to the existence of the darkness makes us realize the importance of the light. So we cannot deny existence of one in absence of other. So he says that these are two sides which are very important part of our life. So one is the darkness and other is the light. So it is not a question of which one you would like to see. It is what the life will show it to you. So media also has its life. So we cannot say that media does this or media is for this or media should be doing this. But you importantly said, it depends a lot upon us as well. What is that we would like to see? And you focused on the point that is TRP. Because it depends upon what media. I remember the term which we were taught in our law school days. They said media is nothing but, rather they say it's a mean of, it was via media. So if you wish to communicate, so there is a via media. So that can be different. So today we have electronic media and most of the people are or rather I enjoy when it comes to electronic media. Sometimes I get serious seeing certain discussions. Sometimes I find fun because I feel that they are entertaining than discussing the issues. But here and then, Mussolini once said, I would like to cite him, people dislike Mussolini for the right reasons or the wrong reason, and I'm not in support or of Mussolini, but his words were about democracy. He says democracy is a kingless regime, infested by many kings who are sometimes more exclusive, tyrannical and destructive than one if he be a tyrant. It becomes applicable to everyone when the moment we say democracy. It is always said that media is most important if we have to have democracy running smoothly in this country. Of course, media should comment upon. There are two, you referred to Sri R.K. Lakshman, late Sri R.K. Lakshman as well. Well, truly speaking, I have grown up reading Maharashtra Times because my attraction reading Maharashtra Times was Kasa Bollat, which is in English Times of India. It was, you said it, a small caricature portion. So I remember comment, because media comments, because what is happening on it, how it should be, what has gone right or what has gone wrong, etc. So there was, and this I always cite in my classes, when the said to be scam related to fodder was unearthed from state of Bihar, the caricature which Mr. R.K. Lakshman brought out in Times of India, there were two pictures. One was of Bapuji, father of the nation, and to the right hand side it was fodder of the nation, and a look-alike of one of the person alleged to be involved was shown. In just 2 words, he was able to convey the whole thing to us without shouting, without making so-called statement of facts which you find people are making. There was another, the ones, if you visit Pune, as you go to the Deccan, so there is a Sambhaji Bridge, a small bridge, and at the top of it, on the left-hand side of it, there is one attractive place. For me, it was an attractive place. It is a billboard by Amul. They run this board. And Amul comes with fantastic advertisements, and that's what I feel. It's a branding, but they also communicate a message which society requires. And if you remember, there was an incident which took place in one of the house of the parliament, wherein member of a opposition goes and gives a hug to the prime minister. And everybody, means people were laughing, people were something, but the way they covered, they said it, embracing or embarrassing. Just 2 words, but a comment, which was a bona fide and a fair comment, communicates the thing of 2 different sections of life, but in such a nice manner that the social fabric remains untouched. So when you cited, like, it is of course the duty not just of the media, you rightfully said it is duty of each one of us, because somebody said we have to be bothered about even the foundation, we the people of India. We also have to pay attention to ourselves as well. So when we see today's media, what does it show? Well, instead of that, it is not what does it show, it offers you to see. It is up to us whether to see it or not. We just can't put it on them. And if something is disliked or liked by you, you have agencies wherein you can report it. However, when it comes to the loud statement, I'm saying this with due respect to the persons who have coined the term, and I have not understood that word. The nation wants to know. I really do not know what nation or the term, or is there a person called nation? I'm not able to figure out. Maybe I'm too illiterate. But yes, when the moment that word is said, nation wants to know. But yes, it does get that attraction. And people just see what is that something which is coming up. So that's a way of communication as well. And now we have another term, I'll not get into that. So instead of media, I would rather say it's a medium, and which we are using to communicate our thought via that media. And then we are saying that media. So media has done always good work. There are incidences which are nowadays seen by many as increasing number of incidences, wherein sides are taken, and that's where we lose our faith. But who is not taking sides? We also need to understand that point. When we see the other, because when I was listening to Javed Akhtar ji recently, he spoke in one of the sessions organized by Symbiosis. So he was talking about the mirror and the image of the one. So he said, "Kaun sa bimba ya pratibimba?" That is in Hindi. I would like to cite. "Kaun sa image kisko pooch raha hai?" Who is asking whom? Because you rightfully said, media end of the day is what? It is an image, or is an imaginary icon of the society itself. So society also needs to work upon it. And there were people who cited about, but yes, courts never, I have not experienced, rather, maybe I have not been to courts or etc. People may say, but we have seen that such decisions or decisions which are made or they get influence or etc. has happened, but courts had to intervene. And what I feel, but there is one thing, I'm not guiding or citing or suggesting or advising to media, but yes, our work is, including me and everyone, to comment, not to state. And now that's what we see into media. They state it as a fact. And then the whole thing begins, and where the court comes on them, that please hand it over to us and we will look into it. And we have seen what has happened to the lives of the great people who have devoted their life for the making this nation, but it was just thrashed in a second on the basis of what was run as the sting operations, and later on found to be there was no truth in it. So we, instead of believing in it, we need to see it and it needs to be proven. So ma'am, thank you very much for all the comments which you made. I'll not say the statements which you made. And they of course were apt, they were very related, and I could see the very good questions came, because that shows that yes, they all were ignited, and accordingly they asked those questions depending upon what was cited before them. So thank you very much as usual. This time as well, you have done it very well, and I personally enjoyed the session. And thank you very much for gracing the occasion. And we would like to have you on campus again next time. So when we would become operational in the physical space as well. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Over to you, Mir.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of the organizers and sir and Raj, we would like to thank ma'am for giving us this enlightening, interesting, and a very enjoyable session. I mean, and we would love you to host. We'd love to host you, ma'am, in the college, as sir said, whenever things normalize. So thanks a lot, ma'am. We know that we are holding you back from your lunch. I would also like to thank our supporters, Lex Witness, THS, the law firm, and Sadgamaya for their support in this endeavor. I would like to thank our college, Symbiosis Law School, and our guru and teacher and mentor, Professor Rawandle, without whose guidance this would not have been possible. I would thank Raj for moderating today's session, and I would like to thank all the participants who have stayed back and attended today's session. And I would request them to register for the session tomorrow as well. if you want to see the video of today's session, it's available on the YouTube channel of Symbiosis Law School. So you can go there and have a relook at the talk or session delivered by ma'am. So thank you, everyone. With that words, I will hand it over to Mr. Akshay to take over to end the session. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.